been told.
Okay, we're ready to start the meeting. We have Wayne LaRush as the new Director of Wildlife Management here, so Wayne will kind of steer this first, the first group. We're going to start with Dr. Brown to tell us about CWD and urine.
Thanks. I appreciate it. We'll get started. As we've talked about before, there are two main ways that we know it can be spread. CWD can be spread. The first is obviously through natural expansion and natural movement of cervids, and this leads to that sort of slow smoldering expansion that we've seen here in DMA2, as well as expanding out from West Virginia. And the second way is obviously through human assistance or movement of cervids and their parts. And sort of the broad categories we can talk about with that mechanism is either movement of hunter-harvested deer as well as their parts, and also the movement of captive cervids. And this has sort of led to those large jumps that we've seen nationwide, certainly showing up in different areas from the sort of the historic endemic area. There's a lot of things we don't know about CWD, a lot of questions that we wish we had answers for. One of the things we do know is that once it's established in wild cervids, eradication is extremely unlikely, if not impossible, and that control is extremely expensive, extremely difficult, and often very inefficient. And because of this, many states have gone to more of a proactive stance because they've seen the issues other states have had in trying to control this disease. They've taken a more proactive measure and really moved on to doing everything they can to prevent it from either coming into the state, or if they have it in the state, keeping it within the area that they already have it. So here's the current status here in Pennsylvania. We have our two DMAs, 1 and 3, where we have it in captive cervids and have not detected it in wild cervids. And then we have DMA2, which is this large area here that is where we have it in wild cervids that we've detected. And this is now confluent with sort of the large outbreak that's been expanding northward from West Virginia since 2005. In regards to where we stand, in DMA 1 and 3, we've identified it in 3 captive facilities. All 3 have been depopulated. In DMA 2, we've identified it since 2012 in 11 wild deer. And so basically we've done statewide surveillance. We've done that for many years. Despite fairly extensive surveillance, we have fairly low number of deer in this relatively restricted area in DMA 2. In addition to our 3 positives in DMA 1 and 3, there are 49 other facilities that are captive cervid facilities throughout the state that are quarantined. And these are quarantined because they have received animals from positive facilities either in Ohio, Pennsylvania, or in Wisconsin. So one of the questions we often get is why don't we just let CWD go statewide? Why are we spending all this effort to try and contain the disease? And obviously everyone at this table recognizes the importance of deer hunting to Pennsylvania as far as a tradition, as far as so many people enjoying it. But in addition to that, it's obviously a huge economic benefit for the state. $1.7 billion of output, over 18,000 jobs, and over 500 million wages and salaries. So in this era where we're talking quite a bit about budget, quite a bit about fiscal responsibility, we have to realize the magnitude of what we're dealing with here, both from a social benefit as well as economic. Certainly management and surveillance gets expensive and more difficult the more thin we're spread out. So the more positive facilities that show up, either captive or wild, our ability to really hone in our efforts and really go strong at the areas where we have it in wild deer are diminished because those resources are spread thin. And then certainly the final one is population impacts. Certainly we know that it needs to get to a fairly high prevalence before at least we can recognize what those impacts are on a population level, but certainly they're experiencing and starting to see some of that out west. The other reason, certainly, and one of the most important, are simply what the hunters are saying. I do a lot of talk to a lot of hunters, either through email or the phone, and I frequently hear that they are concerned and nervous about CWD. In a survey of Pennsylvania hunters, 82% were concerned about the health of wild deer, and 79% were concerned about the future of deer hunting because of CWD. 44% would hunt elsewhere if one deer was detected in an area. 25% interest would decrease if it was found in one deer, and that doubled if it went up to 10%, which is well below the prevalence that we see in some areas of West Virginia. So what this tells me is that Pennsylvania deer hunters are concerned about this disease. They want us to keep it where it is and try and control it in areas where it is, both keeping the number of deer infected low as well as sort of the geographic area where we have it restricted. So what are our two approaches here in Pennsylvania? On a broad level, prevent new introductions of CWD into areas where we don't have it, and then in areas where we have it, keep the number of deer low and keep that geographic range restricted as much as possible. In regards to introducing it into new areas, this really focuses on movement of deer or their parts. Historically, we've considered high-risk parts are what we're trying to control, but certainly what we're here to talk about today is some of their bodily fluids that we know have prions as well. As far as controlling the spread and prevalence, this really relates to density. So we're trying to prevent deer from aggregating or congregating, and this is why we have bans on feeding within our DMAs, urine-based lures within our DMAs to prevent that congregation, as well as our antlerless permits. And so often we want definitive proof, we want hard data to base our recommendations on, but with CWD oftentimes, unfortunately, we don't have those exact answers, that definitive proof to really make these decisions. And so we base our recommendations on risk assessments. And the two things that go into risk assessment are a quantitative measure of how likely something is to happen. Is it likely or is it not, and can we quantitate it? And then what would be the outcome if it did occur? And so with urine-based lures, we know it's present in urine. The question is, what level of risk is acceptable to us? So as far as prions in urine, it's well established that they can be found in bodily fluids, feces, saliva, and urine. It is shed in urine months before the onset of clinical signs of disease, and recent studies show that it can be shed as early as 6 months post-infection, and that continues throughout the duration of the remainder of that infection. So the duration of how long an animal can shed these prions in their urine is quite extensive. There is one source of debate, and that is the concentration of urine in actual pure urine. Based on the experimental work, it seems like the concentration of prions in urine is lower than feces and saliva. But the two sort of things to keep in mind there is, one, we still at this point don't know what a quote-unquote safe level of prion is. So we can say it's low, but we don't have the data to say that that's necessarily safe or won't produce infection. The other thing, and we'll talk about this in the next slide, is particularly with urine-based lures, you have the issue with contamination based on how it's collected. So what goes on into that bottle and what's on that market is actually urine that's been contaminated with some of these bodily fluids that have higher levels of prion in them, like saliva and feces. Certainly we've talked about this in the past, but they are extremely hardy in the environment. We're learning a lot about what happens to these prions in the environment. We've recently seen they can be taken up by the roots of plants and concentrated on the leaves. We've seen different soil types like clays aggregate them and potentially make them more infectious. And certainly when they're in environment, there are no feasible options to either test that area or inactivate it. So as far as urine-based lures, these are lures that are collected from does that are in estrus or thought to be in estrus, and then they're used to attract bucks to an area. As far as the collection, they're collected in graded floor systems, so they collect it through grates into a large catch pen below the facility where the animal is, and so there is contamination with feces, saliva, as well as urine before that product's filtered and bottled. As far as regulations, the urine can be collected from any captive cervid regardless of certified or monitored status. So those are the two levels, certified being the higher level of regulation and monitoring being the lower. They can be collected from either one, and they can be mixed together from multiple animals. In some cases they are, some cases they aren't. There is currently no treatment of that urine after they collect it prior to marketing it. They can't heat or chemically treat it because that would affect the composition of it and consequently the smell. So it's often filtered, bottled, and then it goes to market. There's no safety testing for it. So we already know there's no live animal test. We don't know the infection status of that animal before we collect it or when we collect it. And there's no approved commercial test to determine if prions are in that bottle or in that urine when it's sold. You'll see a lot of research tests out there. These can either be bioassays where they inoculate lab animals or inoculate deer, or they have some laboratory-based tests, but these are too expensive and not widely available to test these commercial markets. And finally, there's little no regulatory oversight. The only regulatory oversight is that a quarantine facility cannot sell the product. Other than that, this is not regulated by PDA. If you ask them for a list of who makes urine in the state, they couldn't provide it. And so there is no regulatory oversight over this product. And the reason this is important is because it then has no traceability. So if an animal goes positive, they may have a list of what they produced, but there is no regulatory oversight to say this is the bottle it went into, so we can trace it forward. So what are some of the other states doing? Obviously, as we said, a lot are taking a preventive measure. There are 4 states currently that have banned these urine products: Arizona and Alaska, and this last year Virginia and Vermont passed their ban as well, and 3 Canadian provinces. There are several other states that are considering this ban this upcoming year. New York is moving fairly far along in their proposal. In addition, there are a variety of synthetic lures that are now available, and I sent a list to everyone so they could see that they're widely available both within commercial stores as well as online, and there are a variety of different products. So again, this is where we're at today, and again, we're in one of those situations where, again, I think we have a fairly low prevalence in a restricted area. And so if there was a time to take a proactive measure, I believe it is now. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you had.
I have a few.
Yes.
Okay, so we're looking to say that urine-based lures are the cause of the spread, but we haven't proven that. We haven't seen that at all, right? We have not seen the prevalence of CWD expand. And we've been using urine-based lures in this country for years and years and years. Millions of bottles of it are sold every year in the country, yet we don't see an expansion of CWD because of urine-based lures.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And what we're not saying is that the expansion of CWD is because of urine-based lures. What we're saying is that is a risk for expansion. And what we have seen is over the last few years, CWD has shown up in many different states. It's
Right.
shown up in a variety of different locations. And a lot of those we don't have the reason or the source. If you look at Pennsylvania, we could say it expanded up from West Virginia, but we could also say it's an escaped captive. We could also say it's high-risk parts or urine. So with CWD, unfortunately, we don't have the benefit with that disease of tying together definitive proof for a lot of these spreads.
But in Pennsylvania, we tracked it to captive-based herds where the deer have been trucked into the state of Pennsylvania.
Not in DMA2.
Not poured into the state of Pennsylvania.
Not in DMA2. They have not been tracked. The source of those introductions, we could argue those all day long.
Right. I mean, before we step, I get what everybody's doing and I understand it, but before we step on the toes of a big industry, I want to make sure that we in fact know that that industry is the cause of the spread of CWD. And through all the articles and all the discussions for the last 20 years, trucking's been the problem with CWD. It's been brought into an area because we've poured enough urine across the landscape, probably to coat the state of Pennsylvania through the last 30 years of hunting season. And we have not seen the prevalence of CWD because of that urine. So are we overreacting? Are we heading to a position where we're going to take and actually affect, $100 million business or whatever the actual business is and shut it down because of the possibility?
Yeah, I think, and again, everyone has their theories, and causation, the cause of spread of CWD has rarely been proven. We probably have a few situations where we have pretty good idea of what may have happened and some good data to support that. But I think if you talk to the captive serving industry and said, how is it spread, they'd be the first to say there's no definitive proof that it's been spread in captives. And so I think a lot of what we do, because of the way CWD, the inherent nature, our limitations with diagnostics, the incubation, a lot of what we do is 100% based on risk. And so that's where we have to take what we have, as well as the consequences, and make a decision based on that. Probably this industry maybe is $1 million industry, but again, what are we impacting? And that would be the $1 billion industry that is, deer hunting in Pennsylvania. So I think we do have to say what level of risk are we worried of impacting. And I think one of the things as far as the industry here, we don't have the jurisdiction to shut down captive industry and urine production. That's PDA. So we couldn't actually do that if we wanted to. What we could say and what we can have the ability to do is say, we don't want this used in our woods because we think it imposes a risk on deer hunting in Pennsylvania. You can send it elsewhere, you can produce it in the state, you just can't use it in our woods until you can produce something that can test and show us that it's a safe product, and that you can establish some sort of regulatory oversight like just about every other animal product around. When you look at every other animal product, whether it's food, drugs, anything like that, the onus is on whoever's producing that to say it's safe before you can use it, rather than let's wait until it's a problem and then try and pull it.
So I think there's two issues. One is what's the risk, the other is what's the consequences. The consequences are catastrophic for establishing new DMA.
If in fact it's proven that urine-based lures.
I think we can accept that will not be proven.
Right.
There's a probability, and the fact that the urine is one method of transmission, but the fact that urine can be contaminated with saliva and feces is another part of it. I mean, I hadn't considered that part of it when I was deliberating in my own mind about it. But I mean, the consequences are quite high. The probability, obviously, is not a real high method because we would have it in every county.
Well, absolutely. I think that's the point, and we've used it for so long. We've had CWD since the 60s in the country. If in fact it were spreading via the bottle, it'd be in every county in the state of Pennsylvania, as well as in every county of every other state in the country. So we haven't seen that kind of spread. We've seen the spread in a very slow motion, and it's over wheels. So,
But I also wonder how much of that is collected from captive cervids. We realize it's an increasing problem in captive cervids. So it's going to be something that compounds itself or snowballs itself if you've got a bigger issue in the industry where they're collecting it from. 30 years ago, when we maybe only had it in Colorado, then maybe it wasn't as big an issue to collect those samples. But now that we have 49 facilities that are quarantined within the state, those aren't ones that are shipping CWD, but certainly our 3 positives have been certified herds. So we have an increasing problem in the industry, and that is where the product's coming from. And again, I don't want to pin everything on the captive cervid industry. Certainly there are things that we can do with wild deer as well, but that is the source of this urine, and it's an increasing problem in that industry.
Does anybody else have any?
Why is it that you can detect prions in brain matter, but you can't detect prions in urine?
A lot of it has to do with sensitivity, as well as the assay itself works, at least some of them works by having tissue in hand, so you can actually see the prion, so that wouldn't work in urine. They do have things that can detect the protein itself, but largely it comes down to sensitivity and how sensitive is that test. So a lot of the ones that we use diagnostically for brain matter or lymph nodes, that's where the prion accumulates. And they have levels of sensitivity that aren't strong enough to detect it in urine. Now we know that those assays have sensitivity issues, which is why you don't get a negative result on any test. It says it's not detected. Because we do know that there probably is some low level that those assays will not detect. Now if you go to a research setting, we have extremely sensitive tools that have been used in a lot of these research efforts, the ones that have actually said, yes, we see prions in this urine, feces, saliva. But again, they're cost prohibitive and not widely available for a commercial application, at least at this point. Now, if you said, we won't let you do this until there's safety testing, then, it's sort of on the industry to figure out how to make that work.
The one thing is one might not be able to test the urine every time. They have shown that it will transmit it. Now, the study, you said urine and saliva, would they mix together as urine and saliva? Was it urine by itself, saliva by
It
itself?
was urine and feces mixed
Urine
together.
and feces.
In that one study.
And we suspect that some of the product that is commercially available could be urine and feces mixed together.
It certainly, there isn't much that prevents that, at least in a lot of the methods.
Another question that I have is that currently we have a feeding ban in these areas, and I know some of us anyway would like to just ban feeding statewide anyway, but I understand that we're banning it to prevent grouping. How valuable of a prevention matter or prevention point do you think this really is? If we were to ban it statewide, would we really accomplish anything on a feeding ban, that is, not urine?
From a feeding ban standpoint, urine is sort of that double-edged sword of it congregates animals and it may have prions. It can have prions in it if it's an infected animal. Feeding would be an issue if you have it in an area. Certainly if you don't have CWD in an area, then strictly from a standpoint of CWD, that wouldn't increase transmission. But if you had it in an area, then that would be where it would group animals together and get that
So
congregation.
you think the tax that we're taking now by just banning in the disease management areas is probably the right tack for a feeding ban?
I think from a strictly a CWD standpoint, that is the highest risk. And again, it comes down to what level of risk are we as an agency willing to take. And each of those management or practices have to be analyzed separately. But certainly I think within the DMAs, that's where at least the feeding ban is in my mind pretty critical.
Thank you.
So I get what you're trying to say about, CWD issues, but when we get into environments such as yarding, and we've got deer yarded up during the winters because they've got no food source or whatever, what difference does it make? And we're still putting concentration. You get into some urban environments where you've got concentrations of deer, it's not going to make a difference whether we reduce feeding or not. They're just so concentrated that nothing we do is going to split them up. We're not going to move them around. So, how do we attribute that as a factor?
I mean, I think it comes down to controlling what you can and not making the situation worse. So there is a level of aggregation that is going to happen.
Sure.
And so do we want to make it year-round? Do we want to, extend that? Do we want to make it worse in areas where maybe it isn't? But yeah, there is going to be a certain level just based on their biology and behavior that is going to happen.
Okay, I'm going to suggest that we develop draft regulations to address this issue, that we ask the staff to meet with the United Bell Hunters and the industry representatives to talk about this. We can have the draft at our next meeting to discuss, and whether we pass it or not, then we'll at least have we'd have 6 months at least to kick this issue away.
Yeah, I'd like to see that the industry is involved in it as well as the sportsmen's groups, the organizations that are in use of the product.
Everybody will hear about it, but I think we
Right.
should reach out to the United Bell Hunters and the industry just to see where we stand on it. That sound reasonable? Okay, thank you, Justin. That was very, very thorough, very good.
Chris? Chris?
I wish I had nicer things to talk to you guys about, at least somewhat today. But we're going to follow up CWD with the current status of high-path influenza here in Pennsylvania. Just to give you a little background so you can have a background in how to sort of interpret and hear, understand some of what you'll hear about in the literature or in the news. There are two ways you can classify avian influenza viruses. The first is based on the proteins on their surface. You can break a virus into one of 16 different H's and one of 9 different N's. Each virus gets one, and it gives you viruses such as H1N1, H5N1, things like that. Pathotype, you also can categorize viruses, and this is based on the severity of disease that it causes in chickens. It's actually a laboratory test where they bring a virus in, inoculate chickens, and see how severe disease it causes. A virus can either be low pathogenic, where it causes mild respiratory signs, maybe some reproductive decrease in egg laying, or it can be highly pathogenic, in which case it can cause very high mortality and very acutely. You can see 100% mortality within a flock within a few days. So you use these two classifications together, so you'll hear viruses such as H5N2, highly pathogenic influenza virus. Now, although they're not directly related, to date, only viruses of the H5 and H7 subtypes have been highly pathogenic. So as far as sort of the ecology and natural history, certain groups of water birds are the natural asymptomatic reservoir for low-path influenza. Waterfowl, gulls, and certain species of shorebirds. Now, in these species, they migrate around, they maintain these viruses in their populations, they excrete them in the feces, and they maintain all those subtypes within their migratory populations. The thing that is often misinterpreted and not really reported correctly is that highly pathogenic viruses are actually rarely isolated from wild birds. High-path influenza viruses typically emerge after the viruses have left wild birds and entered into a poultry system. And so I put this in here. This is a sort of a nice picture that sort of keeps everything straight in my mind, at least. We've got sort of the natural reservoir of low-path influenza viruses, all subtypes within this wild bird reservoir. It can spill over these viruses into domestic poultry. This can happen from having flocks outdoors. It can happen from people not washing their boots and bringing the material into the chicken flock. Once it gets into this chicken flock, if it continues to circulate, it can adapt to chickens or turkeys and become a poultry-adapted virus. And if it's of the H5 and H7 subtype, it can become highly pathogenic, and that's when you see a lot of that explosive mortality. The thing to keep in mind is that historically, once a virus has spilled over into poultry and adapted, it's typically a one-way street, and it doesn't go back into wild birds. And so that's why historically, we rarely isolate these high-path influenza viruses from wild birds. So that's basically the paradigm, and unfortunately, starting December of last year, we had a virus that didn't really read the book. And since November of 2014, an H5 HPAI virus was identified in British Columbia in poultry. This is what we call sort of a mixed lineage virus, so it's got genes from Asia that came over into North America and then mixed with some of our North American viruses. So they're a bit of a hybrid virus, some of our North American virus and some of the Eurasian viruses. Since December 2014, the virus has spread rapidly across the Pacific, Central, and Mississippi flyways. It's been detected in wild birds, backyard poultry, and commercial birds. And there's evidence that a lot of the movement occurred in wild birds, particularly waterfowl. However, once you got into that upper Midwest where we saw really severe outbreaks, most of the spread or not most of it, but at least some of the spread occurred within poultry. This is currently our largest high-path influenza outbreak that we've experienced in North America. To give you some perspective, they've destroyed 48 million birds, well over $1 billion lost. We are talking about massive, massive mortality, 650 million in losses in Minnesota alone. So obviously impacts to domestic poultry, it's as big as it can get. There's a lot of movement to try and figure out lessons learned and how we can approach this in the future. Basically, the mortality has slowed down and stopped. It was stopped, I think the last detection in Iowa was June of this year. And basically what they think is that the virus has now moved up with waterfowl that are up in their breeding and staging areas, and everyone is gearing up for it to return when they come down in the fall. I've worked with flu for about 10 years, and I think the only thing that I can say is that it's the most unpredictable pathogen on the planet. So we can predict that it's going to come back down in the fall, we can prepare for it, but we've seen time and time again that sometimes these things won't happen. So we can hope for the best, but we really need to prepare for the worst. As far as impacts to species we manage, certainly game birds, our pheasants, the preliminary data suggests they are highly susceptible to infection and likely would experience outbreaks similar to chickens and turkeys if it was introduced into a highly concentrated area like our game farms. As far as wild birds, most of the isolations have been from ducks, geese, or raptors. Ducks and geese, clinical signs are unpredictable. The ducks oftentimes are asymptomatic and we only detect it if we're actively looking for it. In geese, they have shown clinical signs and they sometimes have not. So they're sort of in that moderate susceptibility range. Raptors are highly susceptible. They've had several mortality events, both on captive falcons as well as wild raptors. And certainly our wild galliforms, I haven't seen any reports of outbreaks in turkeys, but based on their taxonomic relatedness to domestic turkeys, we'd expect they'd be highly susceptible to infection. In regards to our wild birds, the pheasants would be the only ones on our game farms where we'd expect potential for large-scale mortality. Based on what we've seen out west, sporadic mortality could occur in wild birds, but we wouldn't probably be looking at population impacts. If there is some good news, it's that no human infections have been recorded with these viruses, and CDC is reporting that the risk at this point of human infection seems to be pretty low. So as far as PGC game farms, in the spring we sent out a lot of information to all 4 game farms, telling them what was going on, what are the risks for introduction into the game farms, and we increased biosecurity measures on each of the farms. That included foot baths, making sure that no one was using any equipment that they use out in the field in the facilities with our birds, and spraying down the feed trucks and tires of things that are visiting onto the farm. We're currently working on a high-path influenza response plan. Pheasants sort of fall into a bit of a gray area, particularly pheasants that are raised for release. So we're working with PDA, USDA, as well as Penn State Extension and some of the other larger game farms to try and come up with a response plan that not only outlines biosecurity that we can have on these farms to prevent introduction, but also plans for depopulation, disposal, cleaning, disinfection. How would we deal with a massive outbreak where we would have to depopulate an entire facility? Obviously, that's a massive effort, and it takes some forethought to figure out how you would even get that done. We're also working to figure out plans for release. As far as if influenza would be introduced onto a farm, you're limited in what you can do, and it's basically eradication of that facility. But for the sort of more challenging question would be, if it's detected within an area that's within 10 kilometers of one of our game farms, then we're technically within a quarantine zone. And what options do we have? Can we test and release, or what are our options at that point? And so we're working through that with PDA and USDA at this point.
What is the life cycle of the virus? How long does it take from the time the flock's infected until it shows up?
Very acute. Anywhere experimentally, you're looking at a few days. So it would not be missed. And each of the game farms has been aware of, we're looking for any spike in mortality. You know, if you get anything, send it down to the lab. So it's extremely, extremely acute. We've ever since this started to get more steam and move eastward, we've started surveillance statewide. We've asked all the regional staff and biologists to submit any waterfowl, upland game bird, or raptor that didn't have an obvious cause of mortality, submit them for testing. We're now up to a little over 2 dozen birds that we've sampled through these diagnostic cases. All have been negative for influenza. We also conducted active surveillance where we went out with our duck trapping and sampled 371 ducks. These were all asymptomatic ducks. We submitted these down to Georgia, and we did not detect any H5 HPAI from these spring migrants, and they were sampled mid-March. The vast majority were from Presque Isle and Pymatuning. We've also sampled in collaboration with PDA. PDA actually did the sampling and testing, but they worked with us during our Canada Goose summer banding effort and sampled 559 birds. Again, you can see the distribution there from sort of the central part of the state, and again, all were negative for influenza virus. So we've done a pretty good job conducting both passive and active surveillance, and at least to date we can be pretty sure that we haven't detected it at this point. As far as future surveillance efforts, certainly we're going to continue that passive surveillance on those diagnostic cases throughout the state and into the fall. We also will be sampling a subset of ducks, the fall migrants that come through at Pymatuning and Presque Isle, and we are working with USDA on their national surveillance plan. Their national surveillance plan is almost exclusively looking at the Delaware watershed, so it's somewhat limited geographically, but combined with what we're doing in the Northwest, we can hopefully get a little bit more information on flu in our migrants. So I would be happy to take any questions you have at this point on flu.
Does the disease not spread as well during the summer months? It seems like they were saying it was 70 degrees, it slowed it down.
Yeah, so we do know that the virus can inactivate quite a bit in warm, dry weather. We know it's much more stable in moist, cold weather. So yeah, one of the theories is that they do see a natural decrease as you move into those warmer months. So it's probably a combination of the migrants leaving as well as that temperature, but we have seen it show up in a few resident birds, particularly Michigan, in their resident geese. So
There's no inoculation methods available?
as far as like a vaccination, or they are talking about a vaccine, which is something that they don't take lightly, because what it does is then a lot of bans on products will occur internationally, because you then no longer have the ability to readily detect whether a bird is vaccinated or infected. So vaccination in poultry is typically a last step, but the USDA has created a vaccine that they think does work. And it is available if the decision is made to use it. It is something that has to be injected twice, so it's not necessarily user-friendly and easy, but if you get down to that catastrophic level, there is
It could work like a game farm if we had to.
We would have to get approval, but yes, there is a vaccine that they're working on.
Any other questions or comments? Okay.
Dan Browning's going to give us an update of the Wildlife Action Plan next.
Good morning. I am not going to use PowerPoint at this stage, but rather we'll just talk through a few points about the Wildlife Action Plan as it develops. So bear with me as I just go through a couple highlights. As you know, we're in the midst of revising the existing action plan, and the plan itself is a congressionally mandated document, mandated in order to receive state wildlife grants. So because of the importance of those funds for our program, we definitely are moving forward with the revision. The deadline is September 30th, and we're on track to revise and update the plan in that time frame. I'll point out that the plan is really for all of Pennsylvania. It's not just the Game Commission's plan, or even just Fish and Boat and Game Commission together. And it is a joint effort. We're doing it collaboratively. But when I say it's for all Pennsylvania, the implementation is for all, anyone who's interested in focusing conservation efforts on this group of species, which we call species of greatest conservation need. And that means that the burden of the implementation isn't just Pennsylvania. We're really intending to set this plan out as a leadership document. It's been pulled together through a collaborative effort of both agency and outside groups. And as we advance it, we say these are Pennsylvania's priorities for conservation effort. And, so a local watershed group or, anybody could pick up, hopefully would pick up this plan and say, of all the things we could do for wildlife, what would we like to do? And so as you look, as you have, and appreciate the comments you've provided to date, but as we look at it, we have to remember that this isn't just a burden that's being placed on us. This is a guide for the state as a whole. It is comprehensive, and so as you look at it, you'll find insects in it. What are insects doing in our plan? Well, it's jointly with Fish and Boat, and even there, it does identify some priorities that go outside the immediate jurisdiction of Fish and Boat and Game Commission together because of the intended comprehensive nature. It does not explicitly establish priorities for plants, and that's because, in our interpretation for Pennsylvania, plants are somebody else's responsibility, so we didn't incorporate that. It is a very broad, it's a very broad, comprehensive document, but it is also focused. I forget who I was talking to, that as you open it up and look at it, you may think, wow, there's like a lot of stuff here, and there is. It's going to be another very extensive, comprehensive document, and yet, as you look down, particularly towards the species actions, they're specifically identified. There's prioritization there. The threats were identified and prioritized. You may see threats represented, you think, wow, that's not such a serious threat. You may be right, and it was there just as a recognition of the host of potential things, and then, but they're all ranked. They're all explicitly ranked as to the greatest potential impact on the species of our concern. So, and believe me, from the very beginning of the revision, we've been reminded that it has to be a focused document because, it can't just be a soup and nuts thing where everything is thrown in. I hope you'll find as you look at it more closely that the prioritization does show up in the species accounts, particularly focused on the actions. I mean, the actions are what we intend to take. So that's where the prioritization comes. We've just finished an internal review where it's been circulated to staff, and this week there is an intent to meet the required public comment, 30-day public comment period. So that is going out this week. And again, thanks for the comments you've provided to date. We're working to incorporate your comments into the final version. So comment period will then close, the public comment period will close the second week of September. We're looking at the second week of September so that there's a couple weeks left to document, report up and incorporate any comments that come in from the public that are really substantive. Those comments have to be addressed specifically. That part of that public comment period is required. We'll certainly welcome your comments up through the public comment period. So if you want to, put additional comments, take another look at it, you're certainly welcome to join in there. It'll be on, there'll be links on our website for you to take a look at that. This is leading up towards a recommended action for the September meeting, and I did. This is a draft. It doesn't say draft on it, but I have a draft for consideration of the action that we would seek for you in September after it's been finally revised. And it's like, sort of like any of our species management plans, we would seek that you would adopt the plan and, kind of put your more or less stamp of approval on it, and so that as we advance it to the Fish and Wildlife Service for their acceptance, then we would have that board support. It's not that every single last action has to, meet 100% compliance, because, we're not going to take every single last action in the plan, but that it overall presents a good path towards conservation in the future over the next 10-year period. So this is, again, just a draft in terms of what we would request in September. We pretty much have to have it submitted in September. The Fish and Wildlife Service will then go through, make sure it meets the requirements that they've established, and they will determine whether it needs further work or whether it's going to be accepted by the service, so that we can work towards implementation and continue to receive the state wildlife grants. I think those are kind of the big picture points that I wanted to address. I'd certainly be willing to take any questions at this point, or as we have before, accept any of the comments that you'd be glad to make through a protocol that has been set up on our website. But anything you would like to take at this point, I'd be glad to.
Commissioner Daly will be our main comment.
That's fine. Well, we've received his comments specifically. Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
gonna
And thank you
comment.
specifically, because you did drill into this pretty big document and look at specifics.
And he'll probably provide additional comments on his own comments.
Absolutely. Oh, no, that's fine. And because this is intended to be a back and forth process, and yours and other public input, internal input hasn't been fully incorporated into the revised draft yet. But we're not, we're certainly going to do that.
And how much of the state wildlife grants, what does that run per year?
The state receives, has in the last 5 years received an average of 1.5 million. We split that evenly with Fish and Boat. So the Game Commission has been receiving $750,000 a year on average for the last 5 years. It's an annual appropriation. We go to Congress and tell them how important this is every year. And it's our hope and expectation that it would continue at about $750,000. And that $750,000 to a large point going forward is used to support the agency staff. There's a little bit of money for third-party projects, to contract out, but the majority of it starting this year and going forward will be used to support the non-game program, basically.
So we have a non-game program that's not necessarily funded with Hunter's dollars, it's funded with.
There's some, you trace all the dollars, and there's some Hunter's dollars. There's Working Together for Wildlife. Isn't that the poster program? That has for a long time been out there as a revenue source. There's other grants. We get specific dollars for white nose syndrome. We solicit and pursue those dollars, some of them competitively. Some of the development of the plan was received and supported by a competitive grant, that we wrote up, pursued, got extra dollars that we wouldn't have gotten. And so, on any given year, we could track, I could tell you pretty much where the money came. And I wouldn't even venture to put a percentage out. There's definitely some Hunter's dollars into the non-game program. Not a huge percentage, not a big percentage of it, but maybe for the for some of the match to these other federal programs.
If you could put together a little table, like just email to us, that would be, I think the commissioners would be interested in that.
Okay, yeah, we could, understanding that when you put table on paper, it looks like it's fixed in the way it is.
Yeah, I understand.
But maybe a couple years
A
average.
little snapshot, yeah.
Of course. All right, be glad to do that. Any other thoughts or comments on the action plan? Yeah.
Dan, with the lateness of the commission meeting in September, if you get approval at the September commission meeting, we'll have time to get that down at that point?
Well, let me just lay it out how we're going to go forward. The timing is really tough. So the commission meeting, I forget, 28th or 29th of September,
29th.
it has to be delivered. It has to be delivered and received to Fish and Wildlife in Hadley on the 30th. There's at least next day mail, but you see what the dilemma we're in. You're going to look at it, you're going to act. You will have had a chance to look at it and our chance to incorporate. You'll be making your votes. So how do we?
What
What
can
do
we
we
do?
do?
Maybe we should plan a notational vote prior to.
Do that, yeah.
That would be great.
Let's do that by the middle of September.
That would be great.
I think that would be the best way.
Even
Yeah.
even a week would give us time, because you get your public comments the second week, and then give you a week to get it back
And we
out.
could circulate, how were the public comments addressed? And we have to do that for Fish and Wildlife
Right.
Service anyway. I hope we can have it in time for a week, but that would be great, David.
We'll do the
Notational
notational
vote.
vote, and then if we change our mind, we can rescind it.
And, if the letter has to say, this plan is submitted, it's not really finished, so to Fish and Wildlife, we're going to submit it to get under the requirement, it's not finished, we're going to continue to incorporate or adopt, then we may just have to do that as well, but it'd be much better.
Okay, we'll
Yeah,
do it that way.
that'd be wonderful, thanks. Appreciate that. Okay, anything else?
Next.
Next.
We have Bob Boyd that's going to talk about pheasants.
Morning, everyone.
Morning.
I was was asked to give a quick update on some pheasant applications that we're preparing to improve our services to our pheasant hunters as well as the accountability of our pheasant program. Before I start with that, though, I'd just like to give you a quick update on where we're at with our bird numbers this year. Things are going well. We've had some challenges with a cold winter that delayed egg laying. We've had a hot May, which influenced survival in our brooder houses a little bit. We don't have air conditioners in there, so it gets kind of warm when it's hot and humid outside. And also, we had some cold and heavy rains in June after we let the chicks out of the brooder houses that sometimes the weatherman doesn't do a very good job of predicting. But overall, we're probably going to end up with numbers that are pretty similar to where we've been the past 2 years, about 220,000. Knock on wood, considering what we're looking at with the high path AI possibilities. But we do continue to make progress on these applications, and I'll hand this out quick. Mark Niesner, GIS specialist in the Bureau of Wildlife Habitat Management, has been working on this application. This is the map you may recall seeing a year ago, or similar map anyway. This is basically, this top map's kind of small here, but it shows you where we stock pheasants on our game lands and other public lands across the state. 75% of our birds go to these areas. It's the best access for our hunters. It's the best hunting habitat. And a hunter can get to this map, click on the dot and figure out what game land's number it is, can zoom in and actually get a more exact location and convert to satellite imagery and see field layouts and all kinds of good stuff to where we're stocking our birds. But the purpose of this handout is to show what we're adding this year is the ability of our food and cover crews, after they've stocked, to go back to their headquarters and indicate where they stock their birds. Basically, a food and cover person, this lower map here on the first page has some buttons on it. You can see some red arrows. The one on the left is the tool to locate the area. They'll put in their crew area, and that'll zoom right into where they, general proximity to where they are stocking their birds. And then they can zoom in from there to the game lands or farm game projects or other areas. And click edit, and if you go to the last page, then they can, there's a screen that they will be filling in some information in, such as the date, more exact location information, how many males, how many females were put there. So after this coming hunting season, when these records are being captured for the first time, we're going to have a very complete map for next year's season of where basically all of our stocking goes on. Now, stocking locations don't change a whole lot from year to year, but there are some changes that occur. But for the most part, a map from last year's records would be a really good idea of where pheasants are likely to be found in the coming season. So this is, that's one thing that's going on. Also, Lindsay Moad and her team in BAT, Bureau of Automated Technology Services, is working on a dashboard application to capture the number of birds that come off the farms, capture that number for each of the counties every time we have a stocking day. And this is going to be good for our accountability information because it's going to be the original numbers that we can compare all the stocking numbers, roll them all up, it should equal the same number of birds. And it's a good way for us to make sure we got all our records. And so this is going to be a good improvement for our program this coming year. It's also going to be a good tool because of the pheasant harvest rate study that we're planning to implement this fall, the reward banded study. This is going to be a way of capturing the band numbers that are put on the birds and the crate numbers so we can track those specific crates all through the entire stocking process and where the birds end up going. And also, as hunters call, with the band information and when we can set up the payment plans for those who happen to get the reward bands. So this is a lot of work going on right now. Just recently started some of this stuff. Any questions?
Well, on behalf of Commissioner Delaney, who can't be here today, I'll thank you, Bob, for all the good work you do.
Thank you.
He wouldn't let that opportunity go by, so I'll take it for him.
Very good, thank you.
And I think a lot of our hunters are very excited about the changes in the budget program. I know my personal contact with a lot of hunters, it's one of the things that excites them the most about getting back into it. And people who haven't hunted for a long time are getting back out again and buying dogs, and it's made a difference, I think.
I do have about 4 cocker pups, if anybody wants.
Bob, I just have a couple of questions. 5C, 5D, very limited stocking in both of them, hardly anything in 5D. My question is, if we're looking to grow the program, would it not benefit the program if we were to get into a cooperative environment with local farms, where we could stock local farms with these birds closer to the populace or where the hunters are at? Guys are not traveling the 2-3 hours to go pheasant hunting, although there are a few, I'm sure, that are doing so, but a majority of the hunters are staying put. My thought would be to bring the program to them. Let's go out into southern Chester County, go out into Bucks and Montgomery County, where we have huge farms available, and we're not utilizing that resource. We're not going out to them and offering them the opportunity to stock these birds if they open their farms up to the possibility of hunting. What's the future? Can we do that? Can we get into that? Can we develop a program to bring these private farms where we don't own property, where we can get some birds into these guys' areas?
I think, if I understand what you're saying correctly, that's exactly our program. We focus on those farms, private farms, that are in the hunter access program. Farm Game Project, maybe Forest Game Project. Those farms that allow hunter access and have adequate habitat are exactly where we're trying to get some of these birds.
Are we out there looking?
But Director Metz is here, let's ask him, what's the possibilities down in your region for cooperative?
The public access program, basically in 5C and 5D, has continued to decrease over the years with just, perception that people don't want, a lot of people they don't know coming to the property, hunting our property. And the ones that we do have signed up by following our own policy as a suitable habitat, that's a very limiting factor in that you could have 100 acres of farmland, but if it's all in soybeans and corn, it's not going to meet the policy requirements for stocking. So they're basically the two issues: the lack of people that want to be in our program, even though the benefits are there. There's not a whole lot of interest in it, and we have canvassed, a number of times, and following the policy of suitable habitat. Most of the farmland, basically 5C and 5D, is heavily utilized as cropland and not necessarily as suitable habitat for pheasant stocking. They're really the two big issues.
When we, to follow up on that, when we get into the stocking portion of the season, it's not most of this farmland's been harvested. As we get into the October timeframe, a fair percentage of it's been harvested. Even if we work the season, maybe like we have a delayed harvest in trout, maybe we do something different to try to help that 5C, 5D region out a little bit.
I think still the issue would be is finding the acreage. I mean, the program is just not that popular. If they're going to allow hunting, a lot of times they have their certain groups of friends that they allow on. There's still some hunting maybe going on that property, but they're not necessarily interested in opening it to the general public.
What's the solution?
Well,
We have condemnation
the
authority.
solution
Yeah.
that we got people involved in prep was in different parts of the state was financial. And I'm not sure we're in a position to certainly explore that.
I know we're hearing from, you know, like the sportsmen's clubs, that they want more pheasant stockings in those regions. And they're saying, no, there's property available to do so. Maybe we partner with, you know, the, you know, Federation and some of the other clubs that are down that way and ask them, say, hey, bring us some ideas, you know, bring us some properties that are interested in this, and we can get them into the program, try to get some pheasant down for you guys to hunt.
And that's exactly what we're doing in Northampton County. We've met with, around Jacobsburg State Park and some of their groups, and we've actually met on site saying, you know, this area doesn't really meet the, you know, the policy requirements, but they are now working within their local areas to try to work with the state park or surrounding landowners to try to make some changes in that area that would make it suitable. So we have, I mean, we've had made some inroads there, to, you know, to try to get some more, you know, public involvement and to get that turned around a little bit. But again, for the private farms, that's, I mean, that's always been the question: how do we get them to join the program if they're, you know, if they're really not interested in it? That's the big sticker. But we have made some inroads, especially in Northampton County.
Thank you.
And I would also add, you know, we have this program for sportsmen's clubs. If they're interested in raising their own, we provide day-old chicks and technical assistance for building the pens if they have it. And if they then have the farms around them, or people they know that have the habitat they want to put the birds on, they allow hunter access, basically, allow access to the public. You know, that's another great opportunity, but it's a lot of work too.
Sure.
Is that part of your 220,000?
No, that's in addition to.
And how big is that program now?
I would say we're in the 4,000 chicks a year. Used to be huge.
Yeah.
Used to be huge.
In fact, you go back far enough, it used to be most of the program.
Yeah.
We used to
Yeah,
provide
that was
eggs to landowners to raise. And everybody had a hen chicken, and so they
Yeah.
could hatch the eggs without an incubator and all that other stuff. And it worked very well.
Okay, thank you.
Talking about, a little bit about this program too, and I think it's a perfect opportunity to build those landowner relationships, but also any way we can get youth hunting, it's a good opportunity for youth hunting. And we'll be thinking more about, you know, how we can use the program to enhance things besides just, you know, a put and take.
And how many, do you have a sense on how many youth programs we're running now?
In the hosted hunt, we have about 35, I think. It involves about 1,000
Those are
kids.
pretty popular and quite exciting for the
Yeah.
people that participate.
If we're trying to grow, you know, pheasant hunting or even small game hunting of any type, we've got to get to where the youth are at. You know, I get it in the north central and the central part of the state where we've got plenty of space, but in the most populated areas, we're losing those areas to small game hunters. They're just not being introduced to it, and because there's no place to go. I mean, that's truly the answer. If you want a pheasant hunt in the southeast region, you go to a game farm somewhere and you go pheasant hunting, but that's not what we're trying to do here. And we're trying to get not just deer hunting as part of what hunting is, what the tradition is. So to expand that, again, we've got to look to different ways of doing it, get it into the areas that they're in. And I'm not talking about the city of Philadelphia, out in a little park. I'm talking about some of the, you know, more rural areas of Chester, Montgomery, Bucks County, and those areas that are close enough that these people can get there within an hour or 45-minute ride. So, any help's a good.
In addition to the organized hunts, there's the youth pheasant hunt statewide, and that's quite a popular thing based on what my observation.
Yeah, I think we get around 7,000 to 10,000 hunters, junior hunters, involved with that every year. That comes from our game take survey. And we're putting out 15,000 birds for that.
Okay.
Very good.
Next up, we've got Ian Gregg is going to be talking about waterfowl, upcoming bag limits.
Thanks, Wayne. Good morning, everyone. I'll be focused mainly on the late migratory game bird seasons. Of course, the early seasons, doves, September Canada goose, and the first statewide youth day on September 19th. Those went around for comment a few weeks ago, and hopefully everyone saw the news release that came out last week with those seasons being finalized. We had our waterfowl symposium at the Northwest Region office last week Friday. Good attendance there. Probably about 40 people showed up, so that was good. We took comments there as well as through our online waterfowl comments inbox. In terms of federal framework changes this year, there's not a lot, just 2 minor bag limit changes. Canvas backs go from 1 last year to 2 this year, and Atlantic Brant go the other way from 2 last year to 1 this year. Those are both pretty minor species in the Pennsylvania harvest, a couple hundred probably on average, so it's not a real big deal, but just something hunters will need to keep in mind as they're out there this year. In terms of goose season dates for Canada geese, snow geese, and Brant, those we're looking at very similar dates to last year. We didn't get very many public comments on the seasons, and the ones that we got basically said keep them the same, so that's what we're doing. In terms of duck seasons, we're looking at mostly similar seasons for ducks. Lake Erie zone, comments basically requested similar to last year, so the second youth day in Lake Erie zone will be October 17th, and then the regular season will run October 26th through January 2nd. South zone, again, similar to last year, would be a short 1-week segment, October 17th through the 24th. Second youth day would fall on Saturday, November 7th, and then the second segment for the regular season, November 14th through January 14th. We got two comments on the second youth day in the South zone. One of them supported keeping it the same as last year, which is that November 7th date. One of them wanted to look at moving it later, which may be something we can look at in future years, but to do that this year, we would have had to move it later than mid-January, and that was a little bigger step than we wanted to take at this point. Plus, we did have support for keeping it the same, and as you may recall, last year was actually the first that we even did any of the shifting of youth dates by duck zone, so we kind of want to do this one step at a time rather than making all kinds of changes at once. North zone duck season, again, similar to last year, come in Saturday, October 10th, run through November 28th, and then a second segment from December 19th through January 7th. We did get a recommendation there to hold the second youth day in between those 2 segments, but that fell during deer season, and we didn't think, firearms deer season, and we didn't think that would probably go over too well. So sort of our fallback there is to stay with 2 consecutive youth days, again, same as last year, September 19th and September 26th. There again, that's something we could look at moving a youth day later in the future, but to do that would probably require changing around some of the dates of the regular season, and we're not quite ready to jump into that yet. And then finally, Northwest zone duck season, again, we're looking at a similar season to last year. That zone is the hardest one to satisfy people with, because depending on the area they hunt and when it freezes up, some of them want to run straight through and end in the middle of December. Some want to have a break and then run through late December. So what we've done the last few years is kind of split the difference, where we run the season from mid-October to mid-December. This year it would be October 10th through December 12th, and then we have a short segment. This year would be December 29th through January 2nd, so that provides both January 1st holiday as well as a Saturday. And if it does freeze out, at least it's not too many days that people are losing, but that can be pretty good hunting too if the weather cooperates. We actually didn't get any comments for the second youth day in the Northwest zone. There is this is an area we could experiment with a second later day this year, and so I'd say I'm floating this as a trial balloon rather than a proposal at this point. We haven't run it by the Northwest region yet, so we'd like to get input from both the commissioners and the regions on this idea. But we could potentially have the second youth day on Saturday, December 26th, during that holiday period. That would be a day that's also open for adults to take Canada geese, which wouldn't be the case if we maintain that second day in late September. But it'll be cold weather too. The holiday issue, we're not sure if that's a good idea or not, so I'd say please give feedback on The idea of second youth day in the Northwest Up Zone is December 26th. If we don't go with that, then the fallback would be September 26th, which would be the same as last year. I don't have a handout with all these to give to you. I still need to fill in a few of the blanks on the form, but either Wayne or I will send that out. You should have it in your inbox by the time you're done with all your working group meetings today. As always, the turnaround time is going to be very short. We're asking for comments back by close of business Wednesday this week. We'll combine all the input, make any changes necessary, and hopefully get the final selections into the Fish and Wildlife Service, get our news release and regulations brochure all prepared either late this week or early next week. And then finally, I'll just remind everybody that this is the last year for the current schedule. So for the 2016 migratory game bird seasons, we're going to be doing this all over again in February or March. And one of the advantages of that is we'll have a little bit more time for review and comment than we do currently. So again, look for those in your inbox. Please give us any comments back, particularly on that idea of second youth day in the Northwest Zone being in December. And with that, I can take any questions.
And the youth duck hunt, if the youth is only one eligible to shoot, you only have one gun for 2 people?
I believe that's
As we
correct.
do most of our menor guns.
Yeah.
But if geese are legal for the adult, then they both can have a
Correct.
gun? There would be some concern with that, I think.
Well, we already have that situation with some of our, well, actually, even with our first youth day, the statewide one, September 19th, adults are legal, that's during the regular Canada goose season, so adults are legal to harvest Canada geese if they're accompanying youth on that day. So it's, in that sense, it's not something new.
Fine, yeah, it is probably not a significant thing. Any other comments or questions? So you'll be getting it. If you want to make comments, get them in right away. Okay.
So next up, you got Dan Browning's going to talk about the Osprey plan.
If, at your pleasure, if I could have Patty Barber come on up since she was the author of the plan, and if that's all right, have her covered for everybody? Okay. There is a control.
Thank you. I'll try not to make this too PowerPoint driven, but they're essentially my notes so that I don't leave anything out. But I'd like to start by saying thank you to all of you. Your comments were really insightful and helpful. I believe I have addressed them all, but I was a little relieved. I think most of our issues were more not communicating ideas as clearly as I wish I had, because I don't think we were actually very different in our hopes for this plan and the point of the plan. Let me see if I remember how to do this. Oops, that's not right.
It's the right-hand button up
Ah, there we go. Okay, so the main points from your comments that I took away from them was that I needed to demonstrate that there was a need for the plan, explain why or how we could possibly have reached that total number that we were describing in the plan, address the costs or concerns about cost for the plan, address the strategic planning component, and this goes along with the cost, but emphasize that our intention with the plan was actually to decrease, not increase the effort that would be going into Osprey moving forward, and describe how those resources would be allocated. So Osprey, like many of the species or all of the species that we oversee, are in the public trust. And the reason we need a management plan is to be clear and transparent in why we're delisting and how we're going about the process. So the point was simply to provide these objective criteria that we would need for delisting. We didn't actually realize what our population number would be It was one of the last things we generated for the plan as we gathered all the information that we needed. And so it wasn't until we finished the plan that we realized that that recovery goal would actually be below the numbers that we already believe we have nesting in the state. But I would like to also point out that while that 50 nesting pairs is a very important number, that it's also important to realize we do need that distribution of clusters. If anything, because osprey are attracted to other nesting osprey, if something should happen and pairs should start to wink out, it would be very difficult to reestablish those clusters. So we need that number and that distribution to stay high enough that the birds can continually replace themselves as breeders are lost. And that's going to be an ongoing, it's an ongoing problem for every population, but successful populations overcome it easily. So we actually didn't think, or I didn't think too much about the cost of this plan for a couple of reasons. The first being, we don't put many resources into osprey right now. Most of the costs are borne by the public, either through volunteers providing us with the information about birds that they watch, where new nests are, and how successful those nests are. Either state parks, other non-governmental organizations that are interested in conservation put up platforms and maintain those platforms, so that's not a cost that's typically borne by the agency. And moving forward, that would be even less so. And the activities that are described in the plan really are providing that guidance to folks when they're interested. Because if they're going to go to the effort of trying to support osprey, we'd like for them to be successful, as well as the birds benefit from that work. But that's in the, like I said, it's primarily in the format of BMPs and best our other guidance that would help them be successful. We have similar documentation right now on the website for bald eagles, and we envision something similar to this for osprey moving forward. And the monitoring that's described in the plan moving forward would, again, be volunteer-based. So I'm sure there will be some staff time involved, but it would be very minimal. I don't have a lot of experience with smart strategic planning. However, all the planning that I've done, we have tried to make our objectives measurable. And some of that was not explicitly stated in the plan, even though that's how we were imagining measuring those and making sure that we were successful. So I've added some language under goals 2 and 3 to, it's that final paragraph under the general goals narrative, explaining that we would be using page counts from folks accessing web pages to make sure that there was interest and that that information was being distributed to the public. And then I want to re-emphasize that the point of the plan is to recognize how well osprey are doing, to facilitate them continuing to do well, but ultimately to allow us to move on from osprey to other species that, due to our limited resources, have not been getting necessarily the attention that we'd like for them to get. Osprey are doing really well, and they are not a species that should be high on our priority list for critical actions right now. Other species should be taking up those places. Oh, I kind of said all that. But so moving forward, the emphasis would be on maintaining that population, minimizing human osprey conflicts, things like cell towers, improving the public's education about osprey, not only so they do good things for osprey, but so they appreciate them moving forward, because that's the future of their success. And then we'd like to specifically work on minimizing electrocution hazards for osprey, and that's the appendix there at the end. And of course, I have to just put that up for everyone, just so they remember if they have other comments they'd like to provide for the osprey plan, that we're still accepting those. And I'd be delighted to answer any questions you might have.
Do we have significant areas of osprey habitat that are not occupied?
The biggest hole is probably Graystown Lake, where there were hacking activities that went on. birds are seen in the area, and actually, since I spoke with you last, I've had 3 different entities contact me about putting up platforms. And one is at Shavers Creek, and they're a little to the north of Raystown. They told me that they've been seeing birds and they're interested in putting up some platforms. But that's probably the real hole. Osprey really like slow-moving water or still water, so they are not well adapted to rivers where they're moving quickly. And if you look at where they are on the Susquehanna, it's where you have those impoundments and the water's nice and slow. So there are areas, yes, where they can fill in, but they'll probably never fill in the way that bald eagles are filling in across the state.
It just seems to me that they have a poor dispersal mechanism. They'll go off as juveniles and everybody's all happy, they see their ospreys, but they go back to where they were born to have their nest. And in the Chesapeake and places where they've had long osprey populations, they're nesting side by side.
Right, no,
Every buoy's got one.
they will pack in.
Yeah.
They are the one raptor in Pennsylvania that are semi-colonial. There are other places in the world they are colonial. We don't usually think of raptors that way, but they will pack in. They're very attracted. I don't know so much about going back to where they hatched, but certainly to where there are other osprey already nesting, absolutely. There's a reluctance to go colonize brand new places that no one else is living yet.
I like to point out that this is probably one of the fallacies about osprey, in the sense that since we see them, and we all see them packed in at the Chesapeake, or packed in at places along the Jersey Shore, we think, oh, they're going to be packed in Pennsylvania. Well, they're very different places. That's a bay. That's the ocean, and that's where they do better. They do better in bays and estuaries and still water where there's abundant fish. That's where they do really well. And we shouldn't expect them to do that well. That's why we have a sort of a lower threshold for delisting in Pennsylvania, because we don't really expect them to take off the way bald eagles have. We have over about 300 nesting pairs of bald eagles.
Yeah.
We don't expect ospreys to do as well as bald eagle.
One thing about Raystown is the topography is so steep, there's
Right.
very little shallow water in Raystown.
I think that's actually
probably
part of the issue.
Good point.
Yeah.
I wouldn't make a big effort to get them back there because they don't have that much.
No, well, that's actually, that's part of the interesting challenge dealing with the public, is folks think it's like putting up a bluebird box. You put it up, they come, you're done. And we've got osprey platforms that have been up for a decade, that the birds have just never come to. We've got some in the Southwest, actually, that they're starting to see activity after all these years. But you want to encourage the public, but not let their enthusiasm get the better of them, because then they end up on the other side, just, these birds are never going to come. Those people don't know what they're talking about, that kind of thing. So yes, that's exactly right.
Have you looked at the rivers around Pittsburgh? Because they're pools. They're
Right. Well,
regulated, locks and
yeah,
dams.
we have a pair on Neville Island, I think is what it's called. Sorry, I'm not that familiar with I've driven out there, but I believe it's Neville Island. And there's a few pairs in the area, and that pair's been there for several years, and they're doing really well.
But no other ones have?
Well, but see, once you get a pair there, then when you have birds migrating by, you have something to attract them. Now, if it's only their own young coming back, you have to wait, because osprey go south and stay for a year or two before they come north again. But having that pair breeding, then when other unestablished like young adults are coming back, they're like, oh, there's some birds there. This probably is a nice, safe place to nest. And so that's how you start the process. But getting those initial pairs can be really challenging. So, but I expect that there will be more pairs in the Southwest.
And I've heard that there are more that we're not accounting for in the Pittsburgh area, and actually that's sort of tells the tale about ospreys, that actually that's where they do well by rivers, whereas actually there's a lot of human activity, because they're actually they actually react. They're not as temperamental about human activity as bald eagles, so they'll kind of fill in the gaps because there's not as many bald. Yes, we got 3 pairs of bald eagles at near Pittsburgh, but there's a lot more room for a fish-eating bird than that, and so they might fill in some places where there's some human activity that the bald eagles won't put up with, but they will. So that's actually against the peregrines. The ospreys are along the Delaware, but they're near Philadelphia, and which is just an extension of the Delaware Bay population, but that's sort of part of it. The ospreys are fairly tolerant of people compared to bald eagles, so there's success there.
Do we know what the traditional number of nests were in Pennsylvania? So we have no idea what we're actually looking to try to
We
replace.
don't. And so, I mean, we give a little bit of the history, and part of the things, folks weren't keeping track of stuff that way. Before things started to decline drastically, it just never occurred to anyone. But if you look at the counties that we have records from and things, it's pretty minimal.
15.
15, okay. So then what we did when we came up with a number, though, was we tried to think about it the other way around. You know, thinking about having a core to survive from year to year, so that, again, it would be relatively easy for them to attract new adults and maintain those clusters.
Okay, so we've met that though, so now where do we go from here? What's the process to get it to delisting?
What I would like to see happen is 2 more statewide surveys. And the reason I say that is that, and this has been alluded to, but Osprey have always sort of, when we were short of funds or resources, they're the ones that fell off the list and didn't really get the attention. So I'd like to see 2 more surveys so that we can demonstrate that, yes, they are maintaining this geographic distribution that we need, these clusters in different watersheds. And I think once that's complete, then we're very comfortable with delisting.
So 6 years.
Yeah, it would be 2 survey efforts, but yes, it would take 6 years. Well, if we started next year, if we did one next year, then it would be 3 years after this. That would be 4 years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So we could
So-
do one next year and then.
Right.
So in the interim, in between that, we're really not physically doing a lot with the plan.
We're doing the regular sort of interactions that we have with a species that interacts with people regularly. So for example, the single biggest drain from an osprey standpoint is probably environmental review, because there are a lot of these nests that are on cell phone towers. And when folks need to do maintenance on the towers, right now, our environmental staff has them do that work outside the nesting season. And they have the authority to do that, to say you need to do that. If it can be done outside the nesting season, you need to leave that nest alone and do it outside of the season. So those reviews do take a certain amount of time. But I actually hold osprey up as my example of how industry can actually internalize what are essentially the best management practices for a species, and start to do what's right for the species without us needing to tell them. Because the stories I hear is that, you know, cell tower owner A calls up our folks and says, it's outside the nesting season, so that's a big plus. They know when the nesting season is. We've been watching it for 10 days and there's no activity. So we'd like to get a permit to remove this nest outside the nesting season and do the management of the tower that we need to do the maintenance. So they're already internalizing those steps. And that helps our environmental review staff now, but it gives me a lot of confidence too that with delisting, they will continue to do these activities and protect the birds. But yes, that's exactly it.
Do we have dedicated personnel on the osprey plan? Do we have just
I guess
someone
it
that's
would be me.
that's dedicated specifically to
Well, I'm responsible.
just to that plan?
No, I'm responsible for all the T&E birds.
Okay, so you're responsible for all the birds, but do we have anyone that's specifically dedicated to the osprey, where
No,
that's
sir.
the only thing that they're doing?
No, sir. Occasionally, we have hired a bioaid in years when we've done comprehensive surveys. And so we might have a part-time person that would help with the survey.
Any other comments or questions?
I have a comment. I'm new, I've only been here a week. I did sit on Vermont's Endangered Species Committee for 8 years, and I worked on the process of the plans. These plans are essentially legal documents, and I'm concerned and want to make sure that any legal issues are addressed and that we do these things systematically. You know, listing criteria, delisting criteria, relisting criteria. Spell everything out so that everything is systematically done, in such a way that it's defensible regardless of what happens. So I'll be, that will be my focus when I start looking at these plans.
So are you going to then put this on hold? I think you're looking at doing something with this at the next meeting, the September meeting, or?
We had intended to incorporate the
Okay.
public comments.
Okay, so at that point then, you're gonna need to get back to us with a completed plan that's been reviewed, or it's off the agenda for the September meeting.
Yeah, I think the plan is that they will give us the final plan before the September meeting for our review and to vote on it. Okay.
Okay, that concludes all of our people coming up, but I do have this, our quarterly report. I'll just hand that out for everybody to take a look at quarterly reports. The bottom one here.
You're handing us out at the end, so we can't grill you on it.
He still has time.
I think
plenty of
somebody's
time.
coached him on this
You
part.
can grill me.
Wayne, are we passing these out to
Yeah.
like the whole staff here?
I don't know. Well, I was handed, so.
You could have sent this to us yesterday. We would have had all kinds of questions.
Great. And I do want to comment, I'm very pleased to be here and honored because I do feel that this commission and the staff at Pennsylvania Game Commission are top notch. And I came down here for my own learning experiences as well as what I might be able to help out with down here. So I'm very pleased and honored to be on board here.
We're glad to have you.
Thanks.
Anybody else want to grill Wayne now while you got a chance?
Didn't have a chance to read it. Smart guy.
Well, you can find out how good I
We
am,
can
right?
take a break, we still have 45 minutes. He's on the table for.
It's not the first time that's been done.
You want, okay, first page, let's go. Jay's not here, but let's talk about the fawn survival study. Do we have somebody that can address anything on that?
Chris is here.
Chris is here. Come on up, Chris, you're the next.
Come on, come on, there you go, that's better.
You should have just left it in the pile, Wayne. We would have found it eventually.
Yeah.
Just when you thought you were off.
Better off to do it now.
We've gone through the fawning season, obviously, we caught 42. Right now, we are tracking probably around 20 or so. Some of them have lost their collar, so they're not, as soon as they lose the collar, they come out of the survival calculations. We're looking at in the 50s right now at survival. Most of our fawns have hit the 9-week period, which was the first cutoff point that we saw in the previous study. These are the more forested study areas. The previous study, the forested site, had 57% survival through 9 weeks, and we're in the 50s right now, so we're within a couple percentage points there. The southern study area in the 01 study was more ag, and that was 72%. So you could, like I said, most of ours, we're working on state forest lands or areas right around state forest. That's where we've caught our fawns. Predators at this point have taken, or at least we're thinking that they've taken about 2/3 of the mortalities. The reason I say that is we don't have all the fawns necropsied. Some have died since we had a necropsy day in early July, where we got a lot of the early fawns necropsied them, took the samples, and we don't have DNA results yet, we don't have lab results yet. But it looks like about 2/3 have been killed by predators. Bears, bobcats, coyotes, and possibly a dog. So that's the critters that are eating them at this point.
And equal numbers for those three?
The numbers are small, but I think right now we're looking at 4 that are potential bobcats. Some of those have occurred later when the fawns get up and start moving more. 3 potential bears, 2 potential coyotes, 1 possible dog, and then 2 unknown predations. But in some cases, it's difficult. You end up with 2 jawbones and a radio collar. We know something ate it. We just don't know what may have killed it, because there's not a whole lot there to go off of. But
What about all the rain we got? Did that have any influence on the former town?
I don't think we didn't see anything. Made the folks trying to catch them wet, but on some of those days. But
You have video?
actually, I do. I have a video of Brett dumping his boots out at the end of one search. So,
So, you seen anything unexpected?
not
Do
so
you think?
far.
Okay.
No. And we had 1 vehicle collision. Maybe one of
You're
those
supposed to read the hymn, though.
Oh, is that what that is? I thought somebody else was on that.
Let's see. So what about the elk calves for hot monitors? Is there any preliminary information on those?
They're much less.
Yeah, some places they have bear predation on, leopard predate on elk calves. Do we have any of that?
We have, I think in the 2 projects in the 90s and in like mid-2000s when we were intensively capturing elk calves and monitoring survival, I think between those 2 projects, we had 1 predator kill. That was a bear back in the 90s. So we just don't see it on our elk calves.
Okay, looks like you're off the hook, Wayne.
Only because we only
See,
got to the first
we're running way ahead of schedule. That's what we
Just trying to waste time.
We gotta fill in.
That's only because we got through the first page.
Yeah. We'll
I'm the first.
call you back this afternoon if we have anything.
Wait, I don't know if there's anybody here that can answer this, but it seems like in our area, we're getting a lot of reports of, 1 or 2 hens with maybe only 1 poult this year. We had an extremely wet spring after a very bad winter, and do we see that there's been an impact this year on turkey reproduction and the number of poults that have survived?
I don't know, Ian's may have some information. I just came down from Vermont, of course, and it looked about like the same thing happened up there.
Really?
But, of course, we had a bad winter, pretty bad winter.
Yeah, we did too, believe me, the Northwest. It didn't melt till May.
I guess the short answer is it's too early to say anything definitively. We do have active long-term monitoring for both turkeys and grouse too, actually, of summer numbers and poults per hen numbers and so forth. So those are usually run in June, July, and August. So we have the June data is already in. I guess the July data is too by now, but that usually doesn't get analyzed for till the end of the summer, basically. Anecdotally, similar to what you described, I did see, Saturday I was out hiking, I'm not gonna tell you where, but I saw a 3 hen with about 12 poults, so I marked that down for October. But similar to what you described, a lot of people are saying, a hen with just 1 or 2 poults, and that, typically those, wet springs are negative for production, but to really have numbers to give to you, it's gonna take another month or so.
Would we have it in time if we wanted to adjust the fall turkey season, if we thought that there really was an impact?
I don't think
we
we really
don't-
have that.
I don't think we actually do that.
What I understand.
We used to do a set season, then have the possible extension later on, but we haven't done that in quite a while.
I'd like to add, we've got hot and cold spots.
Right.
Okay. In my backyard, I have 32 poults, various sizes, from this big to Fanny Rooster size, and running in 3 different groups. And I see them just about daily. The neighbors have bird feeders out everywhere. And I'm seeing a lot of, I've seen more turkeys this year than I ever have. in
Is
the
it
spring.
illegal to feed turkeys?
Anyway.
Okay, on to our next victim.
What?
Oh, yes, we're gonna take a break.
Leave.
We'll make it 15 minutes, actually.
That's pretty good, 15 minutes comes 1 minute, 20, 25 minutes.
10 after. At least five. And sometimes you get
All right, you're live.
10 of them.
You're going live. Turn your mics on.
Okay, we're ready to start. Where's Ron? There's Ron. Take it away, Ron.
Okay, we are here for wildlife protection. Having said that, I'll turn it over to Tom.
All right,
Run with
good
it.
morning, folks. Wanted to start out this morning with just an update with the State Game Lands Enforcement Detail operation that we conducted July 11th and 12th. And I know you got a copy of the report that we put together, and we made it a little more easily understood. So
Yeah, thanks a lot for that, because just the numbers don't mean much. to
gotcha.
us.
We're used to sending it out to staff who understand those numbers, and we didn't realize that you guys were
Slow.
We could have looked it up, but we didn't want to.
Well, I think, by looking at it, for the first time that we did something like this, we had some mixed results. No surprise that ATV violations probably were they covered about a third of the warning and citations that we issued out there. When we looked at the trail violations, I think we had 17 warnings and 13 citations that were involving different types of trail violations. And it's hard to, even for me, to look at it without looking at every citation, because there's different ways they can write the violations. But for the most part, I think it was a learning experience for our guys. The first time that we did an operation that we specifically focused on game lands, and I think we'll be doing that more in the future. So other than that, any questions on that?
Yeah, with the results that you have now, are you gonna be more focused on areas that you know you have problems? You're gonna bring
You
more of
mean
a concentration on
specific game lands?
or regions or
Right,
whatever the case
sure.
may be?
Yeah, I mean, I think looking at this, there are certain game lands that are more, we need to focus on the trail violations, for instance. Some of the game lands, they don't have that issue because they don't have the human population or just they don't have the trail system on that game land. So I think we have identified some game lands that we need to focus those efforts on, and we'll be doing that as well. Even the ATV problem, I mean, that's been an issue, our biggest issue for years and years and years is ATV violations, and this just proved that. So I think we need to know that we need to focus our efforts on specific game lanes with that issue as well. Any other questions, guys? Okay. The next thing I'd like to talk about is the bat hibernacle enforcement efforts. We continue to do that. I want to show you an example of some photos that the Northeast region has been able to take on some violations involving the area where the big iron fence surrounds the property that we just purchased this as game lands. And you can see what we're dealing with there, what the Northeast guys are dealing with when it comes to people climbing over that. You would think that a fence of that magnitude would keep people out, but obviously it doesn't. I know we just recently went through where the Northeast brought in their food and cover workers, and in areas of that fence where people have been digging underneath it, they've reinforced those areas with concrete and rocks so they can't get underneath it. But as you can see,
What happened to these people?
Is that an
How old do you
adult
think
and
that
child?
girl is?
I was gonna say,
For the most part, I think
cite
we're-
that mother for?
well, we do. Those, we get notified when that occurs, and the trick is getting there in time to catch them. That's probably the biggest issue.
Course of 100,000 volts through that.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
Keep them for a while.
Well, we've been pretty successful.
Directors of food
We've been pretty successful. I think since our last report, although they're getting accustomed to us being there and they know we're putting some enforcement efforts there, we've had 3 more charges pending. 1 count was actually resisting arrest, 2 counts of trespassing in there. So we're making some cases there. It continues to be our number one problem area across the state with as far as people breaching these bat caves. In the South Central, we just put we're in the process of putting the camera into the Canoe Creek Cave there, so we'll be looking at that. I know we've been monitoring the one in the Northwest, although we've had very little activity in any of those caves. Besides this one in the Northeast, so far, very little activity.
That's good news.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the word's spreading that we're looking at this and putting some efforts into it.
The one thing I don't see on here, okay, I do, it's hidden under that bush right there, signage.
Yeah. No, and that's a battle amongst itself, just keeping the signs up.
What, the sign that says don't climb the 20-foot fence?
And the people in the picture, they got away.
I'm not sure. They never get away totally because we're always working on it and watching out for them. I don't know if that's the 3 that they cited or not.
Need a big dog in there.
What's that?
Need a big dog in there.
Yeah, no kidding. I'm not sure what the attraction is, but.
A big fence.
Yeah, a big fence. Yeah, it's a challenge, I guess. But it seems it's a never-ending issue. People come, in fact, I have another photo I didn't share with you, but they didn't really go over. But it's just, you can see, it's just an attraction.
What about barbed wire on the top? Spiral barbed wire.
Yeah, little Constantina was.
So these people are just looking.
They're just looking,
They're
and
plotting their
actually, talking to Dan Figured on this, they may have actually been DEP folks going there and looking at some things.
Almost like Tijuana.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Can you turn your microphone off, please?
Makes them easier to find.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, there's a lot of different things we'd like to do. All right, next on my agenda is to report on our efforts to accomplish one of the strategic plan objectives that are identified in the new strategic plan, and specifically goal number 4, which the objective is 4.4, and it says by 2020 to increase the volunteer deputy wildlife conservation officer ranks to 450 officers by increasing recruitment efforts and removing barriers from Game Commission employees and becoming deputies. This is one of the objectives of the strategic plan that pretty much rests on the Bureau of Wildlife Protection. And I made you a copy of an electronic newsletter that my bureau puts out to all the salaried officers and the deputies when we can get to them in the state. And this issue of this newsletter starts to address the issue of deputy recruitment and what we're going to be doing as a bureau and as an agency to start moving forward to accomplish that goal. And you'll see in my column, I write about a committee that I've formed to look at recruitment and retention and supervision of the deputy program. The committee is going to be made up of myself and Jason Dukoski, who is the administrative, he administrates the deputy program in the Bureau. It's also made up of all the law enforcement supervisors in each region, Regional Director Figured, Regional Director Pat Anderson, and 2 WCOs. Dirk Remensnyder from the Northeast region, or North Central region, and Dennis Warfel from the Southeast region. So our first meeting is going to be held out at Scotia Range on August 18th. And so I'm hoping at our first meeting that we're going to identify different issues that the committee needs to address and then come up with a plan on what we're going to do to address some of those issues. So because we're not getting started until August already and hunting season will be upon us in September, I don't see the committee being completed until early next year. My hope is that we will make recommendations to the executive office and the board probably sometime in early 2016.
How many deputies do we have currently active?
Well, we have about 350 currently, but that does not include this last class that we had in training. They're just in the process of taking their certification exam and coming on board. So I think probably we had 35 in that class. We've lost about 4 of those since they attended. So I'm hoping to add about 30 to that by September.
Matt, maybe you could, what did we have back in the 70s? What were we looking at?
Well, if you read that article that I
It's
wrote
in there?
in the 70s, we had 1,700. And I'm not sure we want to get to that point. That was a lot. I don't think we need that many deputies, but I think we do need to work on their numbers. And one of the reasons we sent this stuff out to the field is, I think it's important for us to realize that the field plays a big role in deputy recruitment and management and supervision. So I want to make them aware that this is where we're going as a bureau and as an agency, and that we need to get their support as well for us to be successful in attaining that goal. I know the Northeast region has a deputy recruitment seminar planned for September at the Columbia County Mall here on September 12th. So we're going to look at things, the committee's going to look at things like that to help recruitment. I'm sure you were recently aware we now authorize deputies to purchase tasers and to purchase patrol rifles. So I think we've pretty much covered the gamut of issuing them all the equipment that they need to do their job effectively. So now I think we really need to look at recruitment, retention, and supervision of the deputy training. Tim Grenable, I forgot to mention, he's on the committee as well. So we'll be looking at from a training perspective also.
Well, I'm glad to see this effort being made, because just anecdotally, I remember over the years, a couple of different people have come to me and said, I signed up to be a deputy and no one ever called me back for months and months. And so I'm hoping all that's being addressed.
And I think a lot of that is addressed right now in how the procedure goes, because once they send their information packet into the training school, there is follow-up, both from the training school and the region supervisors, to make sure that these folks are being contacted. But we will be looking at that as well.
Very good, thank you.
What's the period of time it takes for a deputy to be ready to go out on a
It
trail?
could be over a year long from initial inquiry into the program till we complete a background investigation, they go through the training, and they go through the certification exam. It could be over a year.
Okay. How long is it going to take you to get out there and do some work?
7, 8 years.
20. Well, and that's part of the goal as well, is to find a way to encourage Game Commission employees who are already working for us, who are already familiar with the agency, to maybe be interested. And, for years, we've kind of discouraged that somewhat. And now we've realized that there's a benefit to that. So we're looking at, Brian is a prime example.
He's a test case.
Yeah, right.
He's the poster child.
So it was just our policy not to allow the food and cover corps and other.
Well, we don't not allow them to it. We just don't really provide them with a lot of incentive to do it. That's what it was.
We do have some now that are deputies.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
It wasn't that they weren't allowed to do it, though. I mean, they could do it,
Right.
just, we didn't make it easy for them to do it.
We made
Yeah.
them take leave, and we're very restrictive on what they could do while they were working, if they were a deputy and things like that. Okay, Peregrine Falcon take application update. We have 7 applications that we received for the Peregrine take permit. That period where we're accepting applications is closed.
And we're going to be holding the public drawing here this Friday, the 14th, at 1 p.m. I just talked to Chad Eiler, who tells me there's quite an interest in attending from a lot of the Peregrine Falcon folks, so we're expecting a pretty good turnout for that. And the permit,
All of the applicants met the criteria, and so.
yep,
they're
they
all
were good.
growing.
How many applicants did you get?
7.
7?
The permit will be issued August 31st, and the season for the tape will be September 20th through October 20th. So, yeah. They were slow coming in, but then 7's a pretty good number. Yeah. I'm pretty happy with that. Last 2 items I have are just if there are any questions concerning the 2 regulations that are up for final adoption at the September meeting. The one is relative to adding the bald and golden eagle replacement cost of $2,500. And the other section deals with adding mentored youth hunting eligibility to hunt cottontail rabbits and mourning doves. We have that for final adoption in September. Other than that, I
All right.
any questions? That was quick.
Questions? We're done, thank you.
Very good, thank you.
We're back at 1 o'clock.
That's it?
Unless you want to,